It was the DNA on this knife sheath that links Bryan Kohberger to the crime. It's what makes him suspicious. And you can let me know down below if you disagree, but if we believe the anonymous sources, this was a sheath that was purchased online through one of these web stores by Bryan Kohberger either while he was in Washington or while he was in Pennsylvania, depending on the anonymous source. Thank goodness we have a gag order here that prevents the leak of information and prevents us from hearing the defense's side of the story. But I had a conversation with someone the other day about this case, and they asked me, well, why do you feel he is innocent? And I raised these certain questions that I've raised on this channel. And he said, okay, well, how did Bryan Kohberger's DNA get on the knife sheath to begin with? And this is a valid question, and it is one that we can speculate on and we can make guesses on. But I would be willing to bet that I could make a case for how his DNA ended up on the sheath, and it's not necessarily so difficult to prove. And at any point in time, feel free to disagree. And if an open conversation is something you prefer, then this is the place for you. Welcome to The Point, so let's talk about it.
Copyright disclaimer. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Yes, the DNA on the sheath. We have heard this was a key piece of evidence. We all know it to be a key piece of evidence, but those of us who are in the middle and raise questions also know that that doesn't necessarily tie him to the crime scene and inside the home. But how did his DNA get there? And if it wasn't him, then what had happened? These are all valid questions. The general theory by those who believe he is guilty is that this was purchased online. That is how he obtained this particular knife. And it was left at the scene by mistake while he was wearing some sort of magical super hazmat dicky suit, apparently. And this was the fatal flaw. This was the chink in his armor. This was his mistake. And I would want to know if you have heard the theory that his DNA was planted by the authorities. They're saying they found the sheath, and then they did the investigative genetic genealogy, which led them to Bryan Kohberger. They seized him, they did the buccal swab, and they had his DNA match the DNA that was planted. But for that to be possible, would he have not had to have already been known at that time? And would they have not had to have already somehow got into his home or into his office, grabbed something with his DNA, then put it on the knife sheath, and then go forward from there? Now, I was under the impression, though, that they had found the sheath, sent it to a lab, it wasn't able to pull nothing out of the database, and it ended up at the FBI where they built this investigative genealogy tree. And these seem to be, on both sides of that particular argument, two of the leading theories, both for and against. And if you have heard another one, let me know down in the comments below. But we also know that this is touch DNA. And we also know that touch DNA transfers. And it transfers a whole lot easier than what we realize. And every 6 months to a year, we learn more about how this DNA can be transferred, the ease at which it can be transferred, which is why DNA on its own is not the gold standard and it is not the end-all be-all, and we have addressed it. But how would it have gotten there? If Bryan Kohberger did not purchase this weapon in this sheath online, how did his DNA end up on the sheath? Well, one of the running theories that we have come across before is that this was a party home. In fact, it was very recently that the New York Post did an article stating that one of the possible defenses they're going to use is that this was a party home and Bryan Kohberger had went to the house. Right off the bat, that is a losing argument in my opinion. Jay Loxton has already said on the record his client has no ties to these victims. There is no link between Bryan Kohberger and these victims. Now we can split hairs to a degree and say, okay, he's just saying that Bryan Kohberger has never met any one of these four individuals. Or he's trying to say Bryan Kohberger may have been there and he never met them. And before y'all say that is completely impossible, play this clip for you right here.
So everyone here is trespassing?
Well, no one's here that's trespassing, but no one
No one that lives here is here right now.
As you see, nobody who lives in that home is at that home at the time of this party. So it is possible for Bryan Kohberger to have went the 10 minutes away from where he lived in his apartment complex to attend a party at another university. That is possible. And a lot of y'all have said that he was at the home at one of these parties, and while he was there, his DNA got into the home, and then the attacker came in at some point, and that is how his DNA ended up at the scene. And I would be curious to know from y'all right now, if people are prone to believe an anonymous source, wouldn't one of these theories be also believable? If we can sit here and say somebody making a statement anonymously is valid, then wouldn't those same individuals put that same validity into that theory? It seems possible. But if that is not the case, and he had no ties to the victims, he had no ties to the home, he had never been there, never met them, never seen them, had no association with that property whatsoever, then we end up back at the question, how did his DNA get on the sheath? So it is touch DNA. It is DNA that is transferred from a person to an object, and another person can grab that object and transfer that DNA as well. We know this can happen. Somebody can grab something, set it down, then somebody else can grab it, and the previous person's DNA is still on there. If you disagree with that, let me know down in the comments below. But let me raise another possible theory for you. I was able to find 2 weapon shows that happened in that area before this incident took place. Now, would it not be possible that Bryan Kohberger attended one of these weapon shows, picked up the knife, looked at it, set it down, and then somebody else grabbed it? And then in preparation to commit this horrible act, they had wiped down the sheath as best as they could to remove all evidence that they had touched it and had inadvertently left Bryan Kohberger's DNA on the sheath. Would that not be also a plausible theory? I'm not saying I'm right here. I'm just trying to understand, if he didn't do it, and I still have my doubts, what are the possibilities for other individuals? And say, okay, he didn't attend any type of show that had weapons available. That is possible. Well, don't pawn shops sell these types of things? I mean, they do in my area, and I'm pretty sure they do in yours. And are there not pawn shops in the Pullman, Washington, and Moscow area? Now, based off my Google search, I found 3 pawn shops in Moscow and 2 that would possibly sell something like this in Washington. And as we know, Bryan Kohberger was a college student. Now, college students aren't known for having a lot of money. They're not known for having a ton of disposable income. So it is quite possible that he had walked into one of these pawn shops to purchase something at a significantly lower cost and had stumbled across this knife sheath, grabbed it, looked at the weapon, and put it back. That is possible. And then the suspect had came in, grabbed that same weapon, and it was used to commit this horrible act. These seem like plausible situations. Now, is it true or is it not true? I don't know. We don't have all this evidence. And it does seem awfully convenient that everything leaking out from an anonymous source is pitched towards the prosecution in this case. Now, if they're trying to say that he purchased this particular knife, and they can't prove it through his bank account records, they can't prove it through his internet searches, then it would seem like a done deal, and he is exonerated of these charges. Now, if they can prove that he purchased this knife, they have the evidence, so be it, and that is that. But there was that story that came out a few months ago where they were saying, okay, let's look at his search history, let's see what he's clicked on, let's see if he has placed a K-bar in his shopping cart at any point in time. And it seemed like they were saying, okay, we're not necessarily going to say he purchased one online, but we're going to say he looked at it. We're going to say he placed it in his cart and then he removed it and didn't purchase it. But it seems to me, and you can let me know down in the comments below, there is a possibility here that if he didn't do it, and an explanation for how his DNA ended up on the sheath was either at a pawn shop or some community event, he had touched the knife and the knife sheath, and had given it back to the individual, and then somehow through time, that individual had committed an act, and now Bryan Kohberger's getting hung on it. It has happened before. If you disagree, you can let me know down in the comments below. But it was an interesting thought. It's something I continue to think about and find rational ways to explain what is going on and my point of view on things when so much is sealed, except for what is conveniently leaked. If you have a different opinion, you can let me know down in the comments below. Other than that, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. Y'all stay safe, and I'll catch you in the next one.